In the darkness of the far future, there is only war. And in the heart of that war lies the greatest betrayal of all. This is the tale of the Horus Heresy. 10,000 years of lies, and 10,000 years of eternal pain. In the beginning, there was only the scattered dream of unity. The galaxy was a fractured graveyard of empires that had risen and fallen long before mankind's birth. Among the stars, humanity had spread recklessly during the age of technology, only to collapse in fire during the long night of old night. Warp storms raged, seekers burned worlds to ash, and the human race teetered on the brink of extinction. It was in this chaos that the Emperor rose, a being of impossible age, wisdom, and power, crafted by the will of countless shamans long dead, born in silence, hidden for millennia, and waiting for the time when humanity most needed a guiding hand. He began his Great Crusade, a titanic effort to reunite the scattered worlds of mankind under a single banner, the Banner of Terra. But the Emperor knew he could not do it alone. To conquer the galaxy, he required generals who could match his will, warriors who could embody his vision, and sons who could inspire armies across the stars. Thus were created the Primarchs. Each was a demigod of war, a fragment of the Emperor's own genius and power, shaped by science and sorcery, destined to lead legions that would carve order out of the void. But fate intervened. The ruinous powers, the dark gods of the warp, feared the coming of these children. They reached out with talons of corruption, scattering the Primarchs across the galaxy, flinging them to distant worlds before the Emperor could raise them himself. Each was lost, cast into exile, to grow upon strange souls, shaped by alien skies. And among them, one would rise above all: Horus. Horus was discovered upon the barren world of Sithonia, a place scarred by endless mining and gang war. The surface of that planet was little more than shattered rock and suffocating tunnels, where survival was bought through violence, loyalty, and the shedding of blood. For lesser men, Sithonia was a tomb. But for Horus, it was the crucible. From the first breath he drew, he seemed touched by destiny. Even among the gangs and tribes of that world, he rose swiftly, commanding respect not merely through violence, but through charisma. Where others fought for scraps, Horus fought for. He gathered warriors around him, not by fear, but by loyalty. He had the rare gift of making others believe in him, to see in his eyes a fire that promised more than survival. It promised greatness. When the Emperor arrived on Sithonia, the meeting was not one of conquest, but of recognition. The Emperor looked upon Horus and saw not just a son, but the son, the one in whom his dying found perfect reflection. Unlike many of his brothers, Horus did not resist his father's call. He embraced it. He bent the knee not as a slave, but as a son bowing to the father he had always been waiting for. From that day forward, Horus became the first of the Primarchs to stand beside the Emperor. They fought together, shoulder to shoulder, their bond forged in battle, their victories countless. Horus was not simply another general, he was the Emperor's right hand, his companion, his confidant. Others would come later, other sons rediscovered, other legions raised, but none would ever rival the closeness of that first bond. Imagine the scene. The halls of a conquered palace stretch in silence, banners torn, walls scorched by the fury of orbital bombardment. Through the smoke, two figures stride. One is the Emperor, radiant, towering, draped in golden armor that seems to carry the light of the stars themselves. The other is Horus, tall, broad, his face alight with youthful pride and unshakable confidence. The people kneel before them. The war is won. The Imperium grows. And in that moment, the Emperor does not walk alone. He walks with his son, the first, the greatest, the beloved. Underscore 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 in time. The Great Crusade grew vast beyond reckoning. The 20 Primarchs were slowly found, and with them, the legions that bore their John seed. Each Primarch brought glory, and each carved victories into the endless stars. But among them all, none shone brighter than Horus. He was a master of war, but more than that, he was a master of men. The legions did not merely follow him, they loved him. Where some of his brothers inspired fear, Horus inspired devotion. Where some enforced discipline through terror, Horus commanded respect through loyalty freely given. He was bold, but not reckless, cunning, but not cruel. In him, the soldiers of the Imperium saw not only a general, but a brother, a father, a leader who carried their hopes as though they were his own. Even his fellow Primarchs, prideful and mighty as they were, could not deny Horus's presence. Many admired him, many sought his counsel. He became, in unspoken truth, the first among equals. But the galaxy was vast, and the crusade demanded ever more. The Emperor knew that even his strength was finite, and the task ahead spanned centuries. Thus came the day when he made a choice that would shape the fate of mankind forever. At the Council of Nicaea, in the presence of all his sons, he bestowed upon Horus the greatest honor any could imagine. He named him Warmaster, Supreme Commander of the Great Crusade. The voice of the Emperor in all military matters, the one who would lead the legions in his stead. The ceremony was grand beyond compare. Thousands of warriors gathered, banners of every legion displayed, their colors bright beneath the artificial suns of the great hall. The Primarchs stood in a circle, their gazes fixed upon their chosen brother. And upon the throne at the heart of it all, the Emperor spoke words that burned themselves into eternity. Horus, my son, in you I see not only the strength of my design, but the heart of mankind itself. Take now the mantle of Warmaster, and carry forth the dreams. Head bowed, and the Emperor placed upon his shoulders the burden of the galaxy. When he rose, it was as the Warmaster, as the son who would lead in his father's name. Hear the echo of trumpets, the thunder of 1,000,000 boots striking marble floors, the roar of warriors crying out in unison, Warmaster. The sound reverberates across the stars, carried from world to world, from fleet to fleet. For a moment, the Imperium is united not only under the Emperor, but under his chosen son. And Horus, standing tall, feels the weight of destiny pressing upon him like the crown of a king forged in fire. underscore 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 years that followed were the zenith of the Imperium. Under Horus's leadership, the legions swept across the stars with unstoppable momentum. Worlds fell, not merely through conquest, but through the vision of unity he carried. He was merciless when he had to be, but merciful when it served the dream. He knew when to strike and when to stay his hand. He knew how to make war and how to build peace. The galaxy bent before him. The Imperium grew vast, its borders stretching further with each passing year. In the vision of the warriors who followed him, it seemed that nothing could stop them. Nothing could defy the march of the Great Crusade. And at its head, Horus strode like a living legend. The first son, the chosen Warmaster, the Golden Age's herald. That even in this glory, shadows stirred. For the higher one rises, the greater the fall that awaits. And though Horus did not yet know it, the seeds of his doom were already sown. But for now, for these brief years, he was the shining star of the Imperium, the son most beloved, the warrior most trusted, the leader most admired. And history would forever remember that before he became the traitor, the heretic, the archenemy of mankind, he was the greatest of them all. The title of Warmaster was not merely a ceremonial crown. It was the mantle of responsibility, heavier than any weapon, heavier than any armor. For the galaxy is vast, and even a demigod must bend beneath the burden of endless war. Horus understood this from the very beginning. The Emperor had placed his trust in him, and with it, the fate of uncounted worlds. And so, Horus rose to meet the challenge not with hesitation, but with fire in his heart. Every star system, every campaign, every fleet in the Imperium now looked to him for command. He did not disappoint. The legions marched as they had never marched before. Under Horus's guidance, the crusade quickened its pace, sweeping aside the scattered remnants of Xenos empires and the splintered kingdoms of mankind. Where the Emperor had been the architect, Horus became the executioner. He understood strategy with a brilliance that few could rival, weaving the movements of hundreds of fleets as though they were but pieces. Lay not only in tactics, it lay in his heart, in his gift for binding men together. When the Luna Wolves, his own legion, fought beside others, they did not merely fight as allies, they fought as brothers. Horus spoke with the Primarchs not as a commander to subordinates, but as a firstborn son to his siblings. He gave praise freely, advice carefully, and criticism only when it was needed most. And so the legions came to trust him. They came to believe in him, and they came to follow him without question. In Horus, they did not see a rival. They saw the voice of the Emperor himself. Picture the scene. 100 ships drifting in the void, their hulls scarred with the fire of battle. Boarding ramps extend, banners ripple in the artificial winds of shipboard hangars, and Primarchs walk side by side. Robot Gilliman of the Ultramarines, methodical and proud, clasps Horus by the forearm in a warrior's greeting. Lionel Johnson, stern and cold, inclines his head in rare respect. Even the volatile Angron, whose rage consumed him in every moment of battle, pauses long enough to acknowledge Horus's command. It is unity fragile, imperfect, yet shining in that moment. The dream of the Imperium carried on a tide of loyalty. Among the Primarchs, rivalry was inevitable. Each was a being of supreme ability, each with pride to match their power. But Horus had a gift that transcended those rivalries. He could soothe them, draw them together, find common ground where none seemed possible. Where Fulgrim sought beauty in war, Horus praised him for bringing order through perfection. Where Perturabo fumed at being given sieges and attrition, Horus reminded him that the foundation stones of empire are forged in patience and iron. Where Lorgar longed for faith, Horus spoke of loyalty and purpose. To each he gave what they needed. To each he was more than a commander, he was a brother. Yet even here, cracks began to form. Some of his brothers bristled, jealous of his elevation. Magnus of the Thousand Suns, master of sorcery and seeker of forbidden knowledge, looked upon Horus with a mixture of admiration and quiet envy. Russ of Fenris, the Wolf King, respected Horus's courage but mistrusted his silver tongue. And Alpharius, ever cloaked in mystery, smiled but said little. Still, for a time, their rivalries were swallowed by the tide of victory. The Great Crusade surged ever forward, and Horus, at its head, became not merely a general, but a legend. It is said that in those years, the Imperium burned brighter than at any other time in its history. World after world joined the fold. Great cathedrals of industry rose from ashes. Armies that had once been fractured mercenary bands became the disciplined fists of the legions. Cities spread beneath banners of the Atwilla, their skies alive with the thunder of imperial fleet. To those who lived in that age, the dream of a galaxy united under the Emperor was not only possible, it was inevitable. And at the heart of it all was Horus, Warmaster of the Imperium. Soldiers whispered his name as though it were a prayer. Civilians on liberated worlds lined the streets, throwing flowers as his fleets descended. To them, he was more than a conqueror, he was the bringer of salvation. The one who carried the Emperor's light into the darkest corners of the stars. The Imperium's expansion was not merely political, nor military. It was spiritual, for men believed in Horus, and belief can move empires as surely as armies. Hear it now, the clash of bolters, the roar of chainswords, the cries of victory echoing across blasted fields. And then, the silence after battle. Horus standing upon the ruins of a fallen citadel, his armor gleaming with the dust of war, his gaze fixed upon the horizon. Behind him, tens of thousands of soldiers kneel, their banners lowered, their heads bowed. The wind carries only one word, whispered like a sacred vow. Warmaster. Horus was more than the Emperor's general. He was his heir, though never officially crowned as such. Among the Primarchs, he was the eldest in bond, if not in age, and the most trusted. The Emperor confided in him as he did no other. When the Council of Terra gathered, it was Horus's voice that often carried the Emperor's will. When the legions faltered, it was Horus who reminded them of their purpose. And though the Emperor's silence was vast, though his mysteries deep, Horus never doubted. Not then, not in those years of glory. He believed, and belief is what held the galaxy together. But history is cruel, and destiny unforgiving. The higher the light burns, the darker the shadow it casts. For even as the Imperium shone at its brightest, the ruinous powers watched. They had seen this rise before, in empires long dead, and they had torn them down. Horus was their target now. The brightest flame, destined to burn, destined to fall. But that moment had not yet come. For now, Horus was Warmaster, and the galaxy bent before his command. The Great Crusade rolled forward like an unstoppable tide. System after system, world after world, fell into the embrace of the Imperium. From the frozen wastes of distant moons to the glittering spires of ancient human empires rediscovered, the banner of the double-headed eagle was planted in soul and stone. Everywhere, the name of Horus was spoken. On the lips of soldiers, it was a cry of victory. On the tongues of civilians, it was a hymn of deliverance. And within the echoing halls of the legions, it was a name uttered with loyalty, reverence, and at times envy. For though all the Primarchs were mighty, none stood so close to the Emperor as Horus. Imagine it, across the galaxy, millions of ships streak through the void, their engines leaving trails of fire across each one a torch that brings light into darkness. Legions descend upon fractured worlds like angels of iron, their armor gleaming, their banners unfurled. Resistance is crushed, rebellion silenced, chaos driven back. In every victory, the Emperor's dream becomes more tangible. The scattered, broken remnants of humanity are gathered into a single body, one Imperium under one godlike figure. And at the vanguard of it all always stands Horus. The Warmaster leads from the front. He is no distant figure commanding from behind walls of bureaucracy or fortress walls. He stands among his warriors, his laughter echoing across the battlefield, his hand raised high to rally them when hope falters. He is the Emperor's will made flesh in war. Close your eyes. Hear the thunder of 10,000 boots striking metal decks in unison. Hear the chanting of warriors, their voices blending into one vast ocean of sound. The clash of banners, the thunder of drums, the howl of engine. Now picture Horus, standing upon the command deck of a flagship, his gaze sweeping across the void, his armor gleaming gold and black, eyes burning with purpose. The stars themselves seemed to bow before him. Among the Primarchs, bonds were complex. Some revered him openly. Sanguinius, angelic and noble, looked to Horus as a true brother, perhaps the closest friend he would ever know. Women, precise and pragmatic, respected his authority, even he disagreed with his decision. Jagadat Khan, ever the free spirit, found in Horus a commander who did not chain him but gave him freedom to strike as he wished. But others saw his rise with unease. Perturabo, master of siegecraft, grumbled in silence at being denied recognition, his genius hidden behind walls of bitterness. Angron, the berserker, raged against any authority, even Horus's, though for a time he curbed his fury and loyalty. Kurz, the night haunter, laughed bitterly, whispering that no man Primarch or Emperor could hold the galaxy forever. And Magnus the Red, gifted with sorcery, watched with unease, knowing that the warp itself stirred at Horus's ascent. Envy is a quiet poison. It does not strike openly, it festers, it whispers, it corrodes. And though Horus bound his brothers with charm and care, the seed of envy had been planted. To the countless billions of ordinary men and women across the Imperium, Horus was more than a general. He was the living embodiment of their hope. On newly conquered worlds, People gathered in streets to see him. They wept at the sight of his armies, at the banners carried by his warriors, at the thunder of his fleets. To them, Horus was not only Emperor's chosen son, he was a savior. Some worlds whispered prayers in his name, though the Emperor forbade such worship. Mothers told their children tales of the Warmaster who walked like a god. The first dangerous step was taken, for belief, once kindled, is a fire that cannot easily be controlled. Yet for Horus, the mantle of Warmaster was not without weight. Behind the laughter, behind the confidence, he bore the knowledge that failure was unthinkable. Every legion, every commander, every citizen now looked to him. Their victories were his victories. Their failures would be his shame. There were nights, it is said, when even Horus stood alone in silence, staring into the void, feeling the weight of 10,000 stars pressing down upon his shoulders. For the Emperor, distant and inscrutable, had left the crusade in his hands. And though Horus believed himself equal to the task, the burden was immense. The music slows. A lone figure stands upon a balcony of steel, gazing out at the endless sea of stars. His armor, though polished, is scarred with the memory of battle. Below, the engines of 1,000 ships hum like the heartbeat of a titan. The camera lingers on Horus's face, proud, resolute, yet shadowed by doubt unspoken. And in the silence, a single thought lingers, unvoiced but heavy. Can even I carry this weight forever? The Imperium at this time was a wonder, but it was also fragile. The legions were mighty, yet each bore its own culture, its own pride, its own scars. The Primarchs were brothers, yet rivals, their differences threatening to fracture unity at any moment. Only Horus held them together, not through fear, but through trust. But trust is fragile, and in the grim darkness of the far future, nothing remains unbroken forever. For now, though, the Imperium shone. Its fleets carved across the stars, its armies marched in triumph, its people dreamed of it. And at the center of it all stood Horus Warmaster, first son, brightest star in the Emperor's firmament. A star destined to fall, Horus stood at the height of his power. Across the galaxy, his name resounded like thunder, like song, like prophecy. The Great Crusade surged forward under his command, more triumphant than ever, more glorious than the wildest dreams of those who had once lived in scattered, broken worlds. To the legions, he was the unshakable axis upon which the galaxy. To his brothers, he was the first among equals, the eldest who bore their respect, or their envy, or both. To the people of the Imperium, he was a savior, a hero draped in the light of destiny. And to the Emperor, he was perhaps the son he trusted most. It was rare for the master of mankind to reveal his thoughts. He was a being of immense silence, his plans known only to himself. Yet in the eyes of those who watched him, there was no doubt he had chosen Horus. When he looked upon the Warmaster, it was with pride. When he spoke to him, it was with a clarity he offered, with the fate of empires, with the loyalty of billions, with the command of armies that spanned the stars. And Horus, for his part, saw always to be worthy of that trust. His victories, his unity, his laughter, and his courage, all of it was offered in service to the Father he revered. Hear it, the thunder of drums echoing through the endless void, the roar of ships breaking through warp storms, their prows lit like flaming spears, the chants of warriors, millions of voices lifted in unison, crying one name. Horus. The vision shifts. Upon a war-scarred world, the Warmaster himself raises the banner of the Imperium high, its golden eagle gleaming against a sky torn with fire. Behind him, the armies of mankind roar in triumph. It is the dream made manifest. The Imperium triumphant. Among the Primarchs, Horus played the role of brother and mediator, ever soothing tensions that threatened to divide them. He laughed with Fulgrim, admired Sanguinius, endured Angron's fury, respected Guilliman's discipline. Even those who distrusted him Russ with his suspicion, Kurz with his dark prophecies could not deny his charisma, his pull, his ability to lead. But beneath this surface, under the laughter and the bonds of brotherhood, something darker lingered. Horus was not blind to the envy of some of his brothers. He knew their pride, their resentment, their whisper, yet he bore it all with patience, believing that loyalty and victory would mend all wounds. He did not see, perhaps could not see, that such wounds never heal so easily. For all its glory, the Imperium was fragile. Its unity was not born of peace, but of conquest. Its armies were not bound by love, but by discipline and the will of gods made flesh. Its people were not ruled by Chos, but by the decree of the Emperor and the force of arms. Horus believed, truly, that the dream was real, that humanity could be united forever, that war could end, that peace could blossom under the banners of the Imperium. But the galaxy is cruel, and such dreams are lies whispered to the hopeful. For even as the legions triumphed, the shadows grew, the warp stirred. The voices of the dark gods whispered, unseen, unheard, patient, and they had chosen their prey. Picture the Warmaster in his chamber. The sounds of war fade into silence. He stands alone, gazing at the stars through the armored glass of a battleship's bridge. His face, proud and resolute, is lit by the glow of distant suns. But in the silence, there are whispers, low, faint, inaudible, the kind that a man dismisses at first, yet cannot quite forget. The kind that creep into dreams, that echo in the spaces between thoughts. The first tendrils of corruption, the first breath of a storm yet to come. Still, for now, Horus was untouchable. His victories multiplied. The galaxy bent beneath the might of his command. The dream of the Emperor seemed closer than ever to his march. Almost the stars burned, and the Warmaster's name was etched into eternity. This was the apex of glory. This was the summit of hope, and like all summits, it stood upon the edge of a precipice. For history remembers Horus not for his rise, but for his fall. And though none could see it yet, the seeds of betrayal had already been sown. So as the tale of Horus's rise from son to Warmaster, from warrior to legend. A story of loyalty, of triumph, of the Imperium at its brightest. But history is cruel, and destiny is iron. The higher the flame, the darker the shadow it casts. And the shadow of Horus's fall would one day consume the galaxy. The Imperium glittered at its height, but even at its brightest hour, cracks formed beneath the surface. Legions that once marched shoulder to shoulder began to bristle with rivalry. Pride gnawed at loyalty. Ambition tugged at oaths sworn in brotherhood. The Great Crusade had united humanity under one banner, yet unity was never born of peace. It was conquest, victory, and the will of the Emperor that bound the galaxy together. and conquest breeds envy. Among the Primarchs, subtle divides widen. Some resented Horus's appointment as Warmaster. They did not deny his brilliance, but their pride balked at his authority. Perturabo of the Iron Warriors seethed at being commanded by one he considered an equal. Lorgar, chastised and humiliated by the Emperor for his worship, turned inward with festering bitterness. Turs, broken prophet of Nostromo, whispered of doom and darkness, sneering at Horus's confidence. Even Magnus, brilliant and arrogant, questioned why Horus's firebrand nature was favored over his own wisdom. Sanguinius alone offered loyalty without hesitation, yet even he sensed the shadow creeping. To Horus, these were challenges to be managed, conflicts to be soothed by charisma and leadership. But the cracks deepened, and in those cracks, chaos prepared its whispers. It was on the world of Davin that fate struck its blow, a planet of rot and ruin, steeped in disease and strange cults, where a rebellion had festered. Horus led his forces with the same brilliance as ever, yet the battle was different. The air itself reeked of corruption. The land crawled with decay, and from the shadows, the servants of chaos stirred. There, Horus was grievously wounded. A blade, cursed and foul, struck deep into his flesh. It was no ordinary wound. It was a cut that festered with corruption, a scar that no imperial healer could mend. The Warmaster invincible, radiant, beloved was brought low, and in his weakness the whispers came. The scene darkens. The triumphant banners of the Imperium fade into shadow. The sound of drums slows, muffled as if underwater. Then comes the heartbeat heavy, broken, echoing in the void. A voice whispers, too faint to understand. Then another, and another. A chorus of whispers, insidious, wrapping like chains around the soul. In the distance, the faint sound of laughter, cruel and ancient. In the fevered dream of his wounds, Horus drifted. He wandered in the immaterium, the warp that seethed with gods and monsters. There, the powers of chaos unveiled themselves slowly, patiently. They did not come with threats. They came with promises, promises of strength beyond measure. Promises of freedom from the chains of destiny. Promises of truth, the truth the Emperor had hidden. They told Horus that his father was a liar, that the Emperor sought godhood for himself, not for mankind, that the Warmaster, the beloved son, had been used nothing more than a pawn in a game of first. His heart was torn, for he loved the Emperor as a father, revered him as the guiding light of humanity. Every victory, every oath, every breath of his service had been for the master of mankind. But doubt is poison, and the whispers poured it into his veins. Why you, Horus? They asked. Why should you kneel when you could rule? Why should you bleed for one who hides the truth? Why should the son not surpass the father? Horus's pride swelled, his wound burned, his mind faltered, and in that darkness, he began to question. Picture this, a great battlefield of ash and bone. Skies torn with storms of fire. A figure of gold, the Emperor, strides across the field, yet his face is shadowed, hidden. Behind him, chains stretch into eternity, binding not only the Primarchs, but all of mankind. Horus stands alone. The chains coil around him, tightening, suffocating. He reaches for his father, but the Emperor does not turn. Instead, the golden figure fades into mist. In his place rises a throne vast, radiant, terrible. Upon it sits not the Emperor, but Horus himself. And in the distance, a million voices bow in worship. The dream ends with a whisper. You were meant to rule, not serve. Thus began the fall. Not with a battle, not with a betrayal written in steel and blood, but with a whisper, a seed, a promise in the dark. And though Horus still clung to loyalty, still swore his love to the Emperor, the poison had entered his soul. And once such poison takes root, it never leaves. The Warmaster lay in his fevered sleep. His wound, festering with unholy corruption, bled not only his lifeblood but his very spirit. No apothecary, no mechanicum healer, no legion sacker could purge it. And in the silence of that helplessness, the serpent saw. It was not the chaos gods themselves who spoke first, but their chosen servants. Among them was Erebus of the Word-Bearer's priest, deceiver and architect of lies. Erebus had long plotted this moment. Humiliated when his legion was scorned by the Emperor for their worship, Erebus turned instead to the darkness of the warp. He bent knee not to the master of mankind, but to the god who dwelt in shadows. And it was he who placed the cursed blade that struck Horus at Davin. He who guided the ritual that would bring the Warmaster into the presence of the ruinous powers. Erebus came to Horus in his dreams. He spoke with honeyed words, cloaked in reverence, dripping with venom. My Lord Warmaster, he whispered, why do you suffer so? Why do you, brightest of the Primarchs, lie broken while the Emperor abandons you? Is this the reward for your loyalty? At first, Horus rejected him. He called Erebus a liar, a snake, a worm unworthy to speak his name. But the words lingered. For every accusation, every denial, does not trust you with his true purpose, Erebus said. He hides his greatest work even from you. Do you know of the webway, of his secret? While you bleed for his wars, he builds a throne for himself, a god's throne, not a father's. These whispers tore at Horus's heart, for had he not suspected, in fleeting moments, that the Emperor's silence hid something vast? Had he not wondered why Terra consumed so much of his father's time, why the Primarchs were sent away without answers? In his weakness, the seeds took root, and in his dreams, the warp fed them. They showed Horus visions so vivid he could not tell if they were illusion or truth. He saw the Emperor cloaked in divine light, worshipped by billions, enthroned not as father, but as God. He saw his brothers bowed, shackled, their wills broken to sustain the Emperor's dominion. He saw humanity not uplifted, but enslaved souls devoured, seekers sacrificed, freedom extinguished beneath a gilded cage. Was this the truth, or a fabrication of the warp? Horus could not know, but what he saw cut deep. The Emperor, the father he loved, became in these visions a tyrant, a god who betrayed the dream of unity, a master who deceived his sons. The soundscape dims, a steady heartbeat echoes, heavy, broken. The faint whispering of 1,000 voices weaves in the background, never loud, but constant, suffocating. A scene unfolds, a galaxy ablaze, worlds burn, fleets shatter. At the center, a vast throne of light, upon which the Emperor sits immobile. But from the throne, chains stretch outward. They pierce stars, bind planets, ensnare the souls of men and women. Even the Primarchs are chained, their faces hollow, their eyes empty. Horus stands among them. The chains tighten around his throat, and in that moment, a voice breathes into his ear. This is his truth. This is your fate, unless you break it. When Horus awoke, his wounds still burned, but his heart was no longer steady. Erebus pressed further, striking with words sharper than blades. You love him still, I know, but what is love when it is not returned? Did he tell you of his webway? Did he trust you with his design? No, he kept you blind, even as he made you Warmaster. You are but his pawn, a disposable son. The poison spread, and in the background, the Chaos Gods murmured, offering their gifts. The Blood God promised strength, an endless tide of fury to crush all who opposed him. The Plague Lord promised endurance, immortality, release from pain. The Changer of Ways whispered of hidden truths, of secrets the Emperor hoarded. The Dark Prince offered ecstasy, adoration, and freedom from restraint. Together, they promised Horus the galaxy itself, not as a servant, but as a ruler. Not as a pawn, but as master. At Horus's soul was not yet lost. He fought the whispers. He clung to his loyalty. Remember the days of triumph, the Great Crusade, when he and the Emperor fought side by side, when victory was shared and dreams of unity burned bright. He remembered the pride in his father's eyes, the rare smile that only Horus could inspire. He remembered love, but he also remembered the secrecy, the silence, the feeling of distance, of being used but never truly trusted. That duality tore him apart. Love against pride, faith against ambition, loyalty against freedom, and the whispers never ceased. Imagine this: the Warmaster kneels in darkness, his armor shattered, his body broken. All around him, shadowed figures press close, shapes without form, faces without features. They speak in unison, 1,000 voices, each echoing the other. You are not a son, you are a slave. You are not a servant, you are a king. You are not loved, you are used. You are not bound, you are chosen. Their whispers rise, a storm of sound, until it is no longer possible to tell which words are his own doubts and which belong to the voices. Horus closes his eyes, and the darkness embraces him. Thus the seeds of betrayal were sown. The Warmaster, once the brightest sun, now lay in shadow. His wound festered, his heart faltered, and his soul trembled on the brink. The gods of chaos waited, patient, eternal. They knew that once the seed was planted, it would grow. And no light, no love, no oath, no father could stop it from flowering. The ritual site was no cathedral of light, no hall of triumph, but a temple of shadows, its walls etched with runes older than mankind's memory, its stones humming with power stolen from the Imperium. It was here the word-bearers led the dying Warmaster. Here, they played their grandest hand. Horus was not dragged in chains. He was carried in reverence, like a god already enthroned. His body, fevered and trembling, rested upon a slab of stone that seemed to pulse with life. The lodge of Davin awaited. The air was thick with incense, sickly sweet, almost suffocating. Chants rose from cloaked figures, their words not of the imperial truth, but of something older, darker. Where once Horus had stood as defender of the Great Crusade, he now lay helpless before its enemies. Erebus stood over him. The first chaplain of the word-bearers was cloaked in humility, yet every syllable dripped with triumph. Warmaster, he intoned, your strength has carried the legions across 1,000 stars. Yet the Emperor would let you wither here, denied of his power, denied of his truth. But we who love you, we who believe in you, we will show you what he hides. His words were the spark. The ritual was the flame. The lodge resonated as the warp bled through the veil. Shadows deepened, voices multiplied, and reality itself trembled. Horus, racked with pain, slipped into the vision once more. But this time, it was no fever dream. It was an orchestrated descent, a guided journey through the Imperium, not his own. A galaxy ruled by the Emperor, but not as father, only as God. Statues of gold towered over broken cities. Chains of light bound mortals to endless servitude. The Primarchs were husks, their loyalty twisted into obedience. And Horus himself, he saw himself kneeling at the feet of the master of mankind, crowned not in glory but in chains. The horror of it ignited his fury. Never, Horus whispered in the vision. I will never be his slave. The warp answered, not with one voice, but with many. A booming laugh echoed, the sound of blood spilled across 1,000,000 battlefields. A languid sigh followed, promising pleasures unending, release from restraint. A whisper of riddles coiled around his mind, showing paths where all futures bent to his will. And beneath it all, a droning hunger, patient and eternal, offering resilience and the chaos gods did not appear as they truly were, for such forms would shatter even a Primarch's soul. Instead, they cloaked themselves in allure, in symbols of what Horus desired most. They promised him freedom. They promised him truth. They promised him power enough to rival the Emperor himself. The narration slows. The soundscape becomes a low hum, like the beating of a colossal heart. A torch flickers, casting shadows that dance like serpents on the walls of the chamber. In the center, Horus stands, confronted by 4 towering silhouettes. Each shifts constantly, never fixed, their shapes half seen, half imagined. Their voices weave into one another, forming a choir of temptation. You are the first son. You are the chosen. You are the Warmaster, not his pawn. Rise, Horus. Rise as master of mankind. The scene lingers, heavy, oppressive, until the whispers fall to silence, and only Horus's ragged breathing remains. When Horus awoke from the vision, the wound that had plagued him was gone. The corruption had been purged not by the Emperor's science, but by the dark miracle of chaos. Strength surged through his veins. His flesh knit, his spirit blazed anew. But it came at a price, and deep within, he knew it. The truth or the lie he believed was set in stone. The Emperor had betrayed him, betrayed all of his sons. The Great Crusade was not a path to unity, but a mask for tyranny. And Horus, reborn in the Lodge of Davin, swore he would not be the pawn of a false god. That when he rose from that chamber, his legion saw only victory. Their Warmaster lived. Their voices cheered, their hearts soared. Horus smiled at them, as he always had. But behind that smile was a shadow. He still called the Emperor father. He still bore the title Warmaster, but his heart no longer belonged to Terra. Every command, every gesture, every word from then on carried a new weight, a double edge. For Horus began to weave his own web, not of light, but of betrayal. And yet, for all his newfound strength, there was still a sliver of conflict. The bond between love did not die, son lingered, fraying but unbroken. The tragedy of Horus was not that he hated the Emperor, but that he loved him and believed that love betrayed. Thus the Warmaster returned from Davin, healed in body, but wounded in soul. The seed of chaos had not only been planted, it had bloomed. Erebus smiled in secret, his work complete. The gods of the Warp watch with delight their chosen champion. But to the legions, to the Imperium, Horus was still their shining star, still their Warmaster, still the Emperor's greatest son. None knew that the galaxy's doom had already begun. When Horus returned from Davin, the galaxy celebrated. The legions rejoiced, for their Warmaster had risen from the edge of death. Songs of victory echoed through the fleets, and banners of triumph unfurled across conquered worlds. But within, Horus carried a different truth. He had walked in shadow, seen visions of chains and lies, and felt the caress of gods who promised freedom. The wound of betrayal festered in his heart, even as his body stood renewed. From that moment onward, Horus became two men. To the Imperium, he was still the Emperor's most loyal son. To himself, he was the chosen heir of chaos. It began subtly. Horus did not storm the legions with proclamations of rebellion. Instead, he spoke carefully, planting questions where once there had been certainty. When warriors asked about the Emperor, he spoke not of divinity, but of distance. Does he walk among us anymore? Do you see him at our side in battle, as once he stood? When the subject of Terra arose, he sighed with quiet melancholy. Our father tends to his hidden work. We fight, we bleed, but he does not tell us why. Do you not wonder at that silence? The words were soft, almost wistful, but they burrowed deep, gnawing at faith like worms in wood. Even among his brothers, Horus began to weave his web. To Fulgrim, he spoke of perfection denied, of the Emperor's refusal to understand artistry beyond war. To Angron, he whispered of chains, reminding him of the Master who had never freed him from slavery's scars. To Morturian, he murmured of hypocrisy, of a father who preached truth while wielding lies. Each conversation was calculated. Each whisper sowed doubt. Not all Primarchs listened. Some stood firm, their loyalty unshaken. But others, already burdened by resentment, already hungry for validation, leaned closer. And the seeds sprouted. Picture this, a darkened chamber aboard the vengeful spirit. Around a table of iron sit the lords of the legions, their faces half-lit by flickering light. Horus at the head, his voice calm, steady, almost mournful. He does not shout. He does not rage. He simply asks questions, questions that echo louder than any command. Why does he hide his purpose from us? Why does he leave us to fight while he builds his own throne? Are we sons or are we tools? The silence that follows is ever zealous, carried Horus's whispers into practice. They had long established warrior lodges, secret brotherhoods within the legions, where rank mattered less and oaths to the Emperor could be questioned. Now, under Horus's quiet encouragement, these lodges spread like wildfire. Within them, captains and sergeants spoke freely of Tao. They shared grievances, vented suspicions, and bound themselves in new oaths not to the Emperor, but to each other. A parallel loyalty began to grow, unseen, unrecorded. The legions were still united in name, but in spirit cracks deepened. Horus played his part with perfection. To Robout Gilliman, he spoke as the dutiful Warmaster, honoring his brother's order and vision. To Rogel Dorn, he displayed unwavering discipline, a son loyal to Terra. Even to the Emperor himself, he maintained the facade of obedience. When messages came from the throne world, Horus responded with humility. When orders were given, He executed them flawlessly. He did everything expected of him except believe. Behind the mask of loyalty, he built his rebellion. The genius of Horus was not in open defiance, but in patience. He knew the galaxy would not crumble in a day. It would rot from within, yet the tragedy lingered. For even as he plotted, Horus's heart wavered. He remembered the warmth of his father's hand on his shoulder, the pride in his voice when he named him Warmaster. He remembered laughter, shared victories, the bond of trust that once felt unbreakable. There were nights when he hesitated, nights when he asked himself if the visions had been lies, if the gods had twisted his mind. But always the silence of the Emperor drowned those doubts. Always the unanswered questions festered. Always Erebus and his ilk whispered, feeding his pain. And slowly the love turned to resentment. Resentment hardened into resolve. Resolve became betrayal. The narration slows. A dream unfolds. Two paths before the Warmaster. On one side, he stands beside the Emperor, the Imperium united, the Great Crusade triumphant. Yet the Emperor sits distant, enthroned, aloof, untouchable. Horus is loved, but never trusted, honored, but never equal. On the other side, the galaxy burns, but Horus stands as master. Legions kneel to him, worlds bend to his will. No father above him, no chains upon his shoulders. The dream flares, blurs, and in the end, the second path shines brighter in his eyes. Thus, the Warmaster walked forward, his mask intact. To the Imperium, he remained their hero, the son of sons, the champion of the crusade. But beneath, he had already chosen. The seeds had grown into roots, and the roots into chains. The galaxy did not yet know it, but the hour of betrayal had come. The whispers of chaos had found their voice, and that voice was Horus. The mask of loyalty could not last forever. The time came when Horus revealed his true heart, and the galaxy shuddered at the revelation. No longer did he whisper in shadows, no longer did he speak in subtle riddles. From the bridge of the vengeful spirit, the Warmaster proclaimed his vision. The Emperor was no god, but a tyrant who sought to enslave not only humanity, but even his own sons. The Great Crusade, he declared, was a lie, a war not of liberation, but of conquest for one man's hidden ambition. He told his brothers that the throne on Terra was not a symbol of unity, but a cage, that the Emperor sought not to uplift mankind, but to chain it to his own immortality. And then, with a voice that carried the weight of prophecy, he offered another path. Stand with me, my brothers, and the galaxy shall be ours, not to serve one, but rule together. The Imperium will be reborn, not in chains, but in fire. The galaxy held its breath, waiting for the response of the Primarchs. Not all were swayed, not all believed, but some had long waited for such a call. Angron was the first, a gladiator forged in chains. He had never forgiven the Emperor for failing to free him from his butcher's nails, the brutal implants that burned rage into his skull. To him, Horus's words were not betrayal, but liberation. Give me war, Warmaster, give me blood. Let the galaxy burn, and I shall be your hound. Orturian followed, his heart still poisoned by bitterness. He had despised sorcery since his youth, yet he could not deny the power that the gods of the warp offered. And above all, he despised the hypocrisy of a father who had sworn to banish all demons. that consorted with secret powers to build his hidden throne. If you speak truth, Horus, then the Emperor is the greatest deceiver of all. I will not fight for a lie. Fulgrim, once a shining soul, fell through vanity. He longed for perfection in all things, but the whispers of chaos had already seeded corruption in his heart. The promise of beauty beyond mortal comprehension lured him into Horus's embrace. Through him, the Emperor's children were the first legion to taste the intoxicating gift of excess. And then came Lorgar, the prophet, the zealot. He had been the first to worship the Emperor as divine, and he had been punished for his faith. In Horus's words, he saw vindication. Where the Emperor had shamed him, chaos exalted him. I have always known the truth, brother. Now the galaxy shall know it too. Thus, in secret, a council of treachery was formed. Horus stood at its head, the Warmaster turned rebel. Around him gathered Angron, Morturion, Fulgrim, and Lorgar, the first four pillars of his new empire. Together they conspired, planning the fall of the Imperium. Their words dripped with venom, their schemes layered with deceit. For Horus knew the truth. He could not defeat the Emperor with brute strength alone. He would need lies, betrayal, and the blood. The imagery turns dark. Picture the fleets of the traitor legions, their banners still bearing the sigils of loyalty. From orbit they descend, not as liberators, but as executioners. Boulders roar, chainswords scream, and the first fires of civil war ignite. The galaxy, once united under a single banner, fractures in a heartbeat. The dream of unity dies in blood. News of Horus's betrayal spread like wildfire. At first, many could not believe it. This was Horus, the beloved son, the Warmaster, the first among equals. How could he turn? How could he raise his hand against his father? But the truth could not be denied. When fleets clashed and worlds burned, the illusion shattered. The Imperium was no longer at war with Xenos or with rebels, it was at war with itself. Robout Guilliman wept with fury, for he had trusted Horus as brother. He had built his empire of order and law, believing the Imperium destined to last 10,000 years. Now he watched that dream collapse into ash. Robold Dorn stood grim and silent, his duty to Terra suddenly doubled. Where once he had prepared to defend against alien threats, he now faced the horror of his own brothers marching against the throne. Vulcan, the eternal protector, could not fathom the scale of the betrayal. To him, war had always been for the protection of the innocent, the shielding of humanity's fragile flame. Now that flame was being extinguished by those sworn to defend it. No war wounds deeper than fratricide. No betrayal cuts sharper than a brother's blade. And this war would be fought not in the shadows, but on open battlefields where once allies had stood shoulder to shoulder. Legion would clash against legion, Primarch against Primarch, and the blood that fell would stain not only the stars, but the very soul of mankind. The galaxy had seen betrayal before. Rebellions, uprisings, even worlds that spat upon the banner of the Imperium. But never had the stars themselves trembled as they did when the legions marched to Istvan. The world was blackened by war. Ash storms the land, and its skies glowed with the fire of orbital bombardments. Here, Horus staged his great deception. He declared the planet a stronghold of rebellion. He claimed its rulers had rejected the Emperor's light, that they had cast off imperial law. And so he summoned his brothers to bring justice, to prove their loyalty, and to crush the so-called traitors. 3 loyal legions were sent to strike the first blow: the Raven Guard, swift hunters of the void; the Salamanders, guardians of humanity's flame; and the Iron Hands, cold and unyielding as steel. Together, they descended upon Istvan, believing themselves the vanguard of the Emperor's will. But in truth, first they were battle seemed righteous. The Loyalists stormed the blackened fields, their bolters cutting down resistance, their banners held high. But as they pressed forward, as they bled and sweated for what they thought was the Emperor's cause, the second wave of legions arrived. The Word-bearers under Lorgar, the World-eaters under Angron, the Death Guard under Morturion, the Emperor's children under... They landed with thunderous might, their drop pods striking the ash plains like meteors. The Loyalists cheered, believing reinforcements had come to break the enemy line. But then the truth revealed itself. The signal was given, and as one, the reinforcements turned their guns not upon the rebels, but upon their own brothers. The fields of Istvan erupted in slaughter. Bolters roared against loyal hearts. Chainswords tore through bow plate once worn side by side. The Salamanders, fighting with courage born of compassion, were encircled and burned. The Iron Hands, unyielding, broke themselves against endless waves of betrayal. The Raven Guard, swift and cunning, fled into the ash storms, but not without grievous loss. And above it all, Angron laughed as his butcher's nails hulled. Morturion's hosts spread their poison like a plague. Fulgrim's sons sang songs of ecstasy as they killed without mercy. And Lorgar, the false prophet, raised prayers to dark gods who drank deep of loyal blood. Slow the narration. Let the sound fade to silence, broken only by the echo of bolter fire in the distance. Picture the field, black ash stained red with blood. The bodies of Astartes piled high, armor cracked, eyes unseeing, once brothers. Not corpses, the sky above churns with fire, and the soul below drinks the ichor of demigods. This is not merely war. It is murder. It is fratricide. The Raven Guard fought to escape, their Primarch Corvus Corax carving a path through betrayal, wings of shadow spread behind him. Vulcan of the Salamanders roared defiance, his hammer falling like a storm, even as his sons were cut down around him. Ferrus Manus of the Iron Hands led a charge into the heart of Fulgrim's line. It was there, upon that field, that tragedy struck its deepest blow. Ferrus and Fulgrim, once closest of brothers, now faced one another. Ferrus's blade shone with righteous fury. Fulgrim's sword whispered with demonic promise. Their duel was not of men, nor even of demigods, but of ideals. Loyalty against betrayal, truth against corruption, brother against brother. And when the swords fell silent, Ferrus Manus lay dead, his head severed, his legacy drowned in blood. News of Istvan spread across the stars like wildfire. The loyal legions had been betrayed, their strength broken. The Imperium, once united, now stood upon the edge of ruin. Those who survived carried scars deeper than flesh. Corax fled into the void, his soul burdened with grief. Vulcan vanished into legends, shattered without their Primarch, their will splintered but unbowed. And upon the ashes of Istvan, Horus proclaimed his dominion. He had struck the first true blow. The Imperium would never be the same again, slow the voice. Let it echo like the telling of a nightmare. Imagine the Imperium's banners torn and burned, drifting as ash through the void. Imagine the songs of triumph twisted into dirges of war. Imagine the galaxy itself holding its breath, knowing that this was only the beginning. The massacre at Istvan was only the beginning. The wound it left upon the Imperium bled across the stars, and into that wound Horus poured his poison. The world of Calth was a jewel of Ultramar. Its skies were blue, its fields fertile, its cities glittered with marble and gold. It was a world built not for war, but for peace, an anchor of civilization amidst the void. And it was here that Horus chose to strike next. The word-bearers, led by Lorgar, descended upon Calth with smiles upon their lips and honeyed lies upon their tongues. They came as allies. They came as brothers. They came under the guise of oaths sworn to Guilliman, the Primarch of the Ultramarines. But behind those oaths lay whispers to the dark gods, promises of betrayal, and plans for slaughter. At first, the Ultramarines welcomed their cousins. Together they paraded through the streets of Calth, banners raised high, the people cheering at the sight of the Emperor's sons united. But beneath the ground, in the hidden tunnels and vaults, the word-bearers prepared their treachery. They planted bombs. They called upon demons. They wove the warp into the very bones of the planet. And then, at the hour of greatest celebration, the knives were drawn, Calth's sun blackened. The atmosphere was torn apart by weapons of forbidden origin. Cities crumbled as firestorms roared across the horizon. The Ultramarines, caught unprepared, were cut down in their thousands. Civilians screamed as the skies rained death, and in the darkness, the word-bearers chanted the names of gods older than mankind itself. This was not merely betrayal. This was ritual. This was sacrifice on a planetary scale. Slow the narration. Draw the listener into a dreamlike nightmare. Picture Calth's skies torn open, not by storm, but by warp. From those rifts spilled demons, shapes without form, eyes without number, maws that hungered for souls. The ground quaked with unholy laughter. The people of Calth, once citizens of the Imperium, were dragged screaming into the abyss. And amidst it all, Lorgar smiled. But Guilliman was not one to break easily. The Primarch of the Ultramarines gathered his sons, his warriors, his fleets. Though taken by surprise, though outnumbered and betrayed, he rallied them with words that burned like fire in their hearts. "Stand," he commanded. "Stand for Calth. Stand for the Imperium. Stand, though the heavens fall." Fought with the fury of a legion wrong, their bolters roaring, their blades flashing. They fought street by street, chamber by chamber, beneath the burning sky. And though they bled, though they suffered, they endured. But Calth was only the spark. From its ashes began the Shadow Crusade, a campaign of ruin led by Lorgar and Angron. Together, they unleashed devastation upon Ultramar's worlds. Where Lorgar brought demons and blasphemy, Angron brought fury and chains. Planets burned, systems wept. The proud empire of Guilliman was drowned in an ocean of betrayal. And through it all, Horus laughed, for every world that burned was another chain tightening around the Emperor's throat. For Guilliman, the betrayal cut deeper than any blade. He had believed in his brothers. He had believed in the dream of unity, of an Imperium of reason and strength. And now he saw that dream shattered. His sons, once paragons of loyalty, were dragged into darkness. His worlds, once beacons of light, were consumed by fire, and in his heart grew a wound that would never fully heal. Lower the voice. Let it become a whisper, like a confession. The galaxy itself seemed to fracture. Every star system became a question, loyalist or traitor. Every legion, every fleet, every Primarch faced the choice to kneel before Horus or to stand with the Emperor. Brother turned blade against brother. Faith crumbled into ash, and the Imperium, once unbreakable, became a battlefield. From Istvan's betrayal to Calth's burning, the course was set. The Horus Heresy was no longer a whisper. It was a scream that echoed across the galaxy, shaking even the walls of Terra itself. And at its heart stood Horus, the favored son, not the architect of ruin. The seeds of betrayal had grown. They had taken root, and soon they would bear fruit in blood and fire. The galaxy burned. World after world, system after system, fell to fire and ruin. The seeds of betrayal, once whispered in shadow, now blossomed into war without end. And upon that war, the Imperium staggered. Those who remained faithful to the Emperor bore wounds deeper than flesh. They carried the grief of betrayal, the shame of failure, and the weight of a dream undone. Robout Guilliman, Lord of Old Trimer, watched his empire crumble under the Shadow Crusade. His heart, once filled with hope for a rational Imperium, bled with disillusion. He did not falter, but in his eyes burned a grief no victory could heal. Roble Dorn, the Praetorian of Terra, became stone in more ways than one. He took upon his shoulders the burden of fortifying the cradle of mankind. Walls of adamantium and prayer rose at his command, but inside those walls he built others fortresses of silence, to guard his heart against despair. Lionel Johnson, the Dark Angel, fought his own wars in shadows. His loyalties questioned even as he spoke, whispers that perhaps he would turn as well. Yet still he fought, blade sharp, eyes sharper, ever the enigma among his brothers. Vulcan, the Eternal, was shattered at Istvan, captured, broken, and tormented beyond measure. Yet even in his torment, he endured, for he was the unbreakable flame. His suffering became legend, a reminder that loyalty does not yield, even in chains. Corvus Corax, haunted by the massacre of his sons at Istvan, vanished into shadows. His legion, the Raven Guard, was shattered, their wings broken, their hope dim. Yet in secret he sought vengeance, his whisper a promise of retribution. And beyond them, others too bore scars, the white scars, the blood angels, the space wolves, each driven, each diminished, yet each clinging to the fragile thread of loyalty. Slow the voice, draw the listener into silence. Imagine the galaxy a great map of stars. One by one, those stars flicker and dim, consumed by the fires of betrayal. What was once an empire of light becomes a graveyard of worlds. Every planet burns. Every fleet fractures. Every brother is forced to question who is loyal, who is traitor. The Imperium does not stand as one. It bleeds, and in its blood the Chaos Gods drink deep. And while the Loyalists nursed their wounds, Horus grew stronger. He gathered his allies, his corrupted brothers, and the legions sworn to him. He spread his dominion like a shadow across the galaxy. The Warmaster was no longer merely the Emperor's son. He was now the arch traitor, the chosen of chaos, the herald of apocalypse. Demons whispered his name. Worlds trembled at his fleets. Even among the loyal, There were those who secretly doubted, could Horus be defeated? It was inevitable. Every betrayal, every massacre, every shadowed crusade, all pointed to one final destination. Terra, the cradle of mankind, the thronehold of the Emperor, the heart of the Imperium. Horus knew that until Terra fell, the Imperium lived. And so he gathered his hosts, his traitor brothers, his legions of corrupted warriors and demonic allies. He forged them into a war that would shake the galaxy itself. And from the void, they began their march. That through it all, the Emperor remained silent. Upon his golden throne, upon the hidden depths of his secret projects, he spoke not to his sons, nor to his people. Why? Some said he was consumed by his war within the webway. Others whispered that he had foreseen this path, and chosen silence as part of his design. And still others believed he was afraid, that even the master of mankind feared the truth of what his son had become. Whatever the reason, his silence echoed louder than any word. To his sons, it was a void that festered into Tao. To his enemies, it was weakest to be exploited. Lower the tone, let it be heavy, foreboding. Picture the void. A million ships sailing, black armor and crimson light, sweeping toward a single, shining world. And upon that world, walls rise, banners fly. The loyal prepare to make their stand. Brother has betrayed brother. Legion has slain legion. And now, the greatest war of all is about to begin. The Siege of Terra loomed. The end had come. For 7 long years the galaxy burned, and now the fire reached Terra. Horus, the Warmaster, son once beloved, now crowned the arch traitor, gathered his legions and demonic hosts. From the eye of terror to the farthest stars, they came. The sky above Terra grew black with fleets uncountable. Battleships vast as continents, cruisers bristling with weapons, demon-forged vessels that bled fire and shadow. At their head, the vengeful spirit, Horus's flagship, loomed like a god of war incarnate. The people of Terra looked up into the night sky and saw not stars, but war. Inside the imperial palace, Robel Dorn, the Praetorian of Terra, had prepared for this day. Walls of adamantium rose higher than mountains. Towers of defense stretched into the heavens. Bomb placements, shield generators, void pylons all forged into one vast fortress city. Every corridor became a trench. Every hall, a kill zone. Every wall, a tomb waiting to be filled with blood. The imperial fists stood at their posts, unyielding. With them came the blood angels, led by their angelic Primarch, Sanguinius. His wings of white shimmered amid the darkness, a vision of hope to the beleaguered defenders. The white scars, swift riders of the storm, patrolled the outer defenses, striking like lightning where the enemy pressed hardest. Scattered remnants of shattered legions also took their place, Raven Guard survivors, salamanders broken yet unbowed. Together they formed the last shield of mankind. Then, at Horus's command, the storm fell. Orbital fire rained down upon Terra. Entire hives were reduced to molten slag. Oceans boiled. Mountains crumbled. Billions perished before the first ground battle even began. And when the guns fell silent, the legions descended. World eaters, frothing with rage, hurled themselves upon the palace gates. Death Guard, their armor bloated with pestilence, spread rot and plague across the soul. Emperor's children, corrupted by excess, unleashed their shrieking symphonies of torment, their war cries a cacophony that shattered minds. Iron warriors, masters of siege, brought their engines of destruction, grinding against the palace walls with relentless. Above them strode the traitor titans, god machines of Mars turned against the Imperium, their footfalls quaking the earth, their cannons tearing reality itself. Pause, lower the voice. Let the scene linger. The sky burns, the earth shakes, millions scream and die, their voices drown beneath the thunder of war. Imagine the palace walls, battered by endless fire, yet still they stand. Upon those walls, the golden light of the Aquila shines, stubborn, defiant, unyielding. This is no longer just a battle for Terra. This is a battle for the soul of mankind. For days uncounted, the siege raged. Every gate was tested. Every wall was cracked. Titan fell against Titan, their titanic corpses littering the ground like palaces. Space Marines fought until their bolters ran dry, then with blade, then with bare hands. The blood of demigods mingled with that of mortals, pooling in rivers through the marble corridors of the throne world. Yet still the loyalists endured. Sanguinius became their beacon. Wherever the traitors struck hardest, there he stood, wings spread wide, his blade a blur of righteous wrath. He fought not only with strength, but with hope, and that hope held the line even as the walls cracked. But hope cannot stand forever against betrayal without end. Each day the defenders grew fewer. Each night the palace grew darker. The shadow of Horus pressed closer, and far above, within the vengeful spirit, Horus watched. He had unleashed his legions. He had broken walls, shattered armies, slain countless billions. Yet his eyes were not on Terra, nor on its wall. His eyes were fixed upon one man, the Emperor, the father he once loved, the father he now sought to destroy. Horus knew this war could not be won by armies alone. The Imperium would never bow while the Emperor lived. And so, in the silence of his throne room, he whispered a single truth to himself. Father must fall. Only then will the galaxy be free. Raise the tension. Slow the words. Picture it. The walls of Terra shatter under endless fire. Legions clash in slaughter without end. The loyal bleed. The traitors press closer. And in the void above, two destinies draw inexorably together. Father and son, Emperor and Warmaster, the final confrontation awaits. The stage is set for the last stand. At last, after months of blood and ruin, the walls of the Imperial Palace gave way. The Iron Warriors' siege engines cracked the adamantium gates. Demonic fire consumed the ramparts. The traitor legions poured into the sanctum of mankind's life. The loyalists resisted with the desperation of the doom. Blood angels filled the corridors with their dying song. Imperial fists turned every shattered hallway into a fortress within a fortress. The white scars struck and vanished, their speed a phantom torment upon the enemy. But still, the traitors came. The tide of chaos was endless. The halls of the palace ran red with blood. Statues of victory were shattered. Frescoes of the Emperor's triumph burned to ash. Terra itself groaned beneath the weight of betrayal. At the heart of the defense stood Sanguinius, the Angel of Baal, the most beloved of the Emperor's sons, bore his golden blade and his white wings, now stained with ash and blood. Prophecy had long whispered of his death. He had seen it himself, in visions that haunted his nights, visions of a dark future where he stood alone before the Warmaster and fell, and yet he did not falter, for he knew sacrifice was his destiny. Hope must have a price, and his blood angels one last time. His voice rose above the thunder of war, carrying through smoke and ruin. Brothers, we stand at the gates of eternity. This is the hour of our death, but let it be glorious. Let it be worthy of the blood we bear. The Emperor washes us. Let us not fail him now. The blood angels roared their oath, their crimson armor gleaming as though aflame, and together they plunged into the fire. High above the burning palace, the vengeful spirit hung in low orbit. Its presence was a shadow cast upon Terra itself. It was there that Horus waited. It was there the final confrontation must come. The Emperor knew this. He could not reach his son while the battle raged across the palace. But the angel could. Sanguinius, carried on wings of white, ascended through fire and ash, through void shields, storms, and burning wreckage, until he stood before the ship of the traitor Warmaster. Alone he entered. Alone he walked the halls of the vengeful spirit. Slow the voice. Make it dreamlike, as though the listener walks beside him. The halls writhe with demonic corruption. Walls of steel breathe like flesh, lights pulse like veins. Shadows whisper. The ship itself is alive, a creature of chaos, and Sanguinius walks its arteries toward the heart. And there, at the throne chamber, he finds him, Horus, the Warmaster, clad in armor blacker than night, trimmed with the gold of arrogance and the crimson of betrayal. His presence filled the chamber like a storm. His eyes glowed with the fire of the warp, yet behind them flickered the memory of the son who once swore loyalty, who once called the Emperor father with love. The two brothers stood, one angelic, broken but unbowed, the other fallen, mighty, crowned with ruin. There were no words of reconciliation. Horus had chosen. Sanguinius had foreseen. The clash was inevitable. The chamber shook as their blades met. The Warmaster's power was terrible, fueled not only by his own genius but by the gifts of the dark gods. Every strike he made could shatter a mountain, every blow a tempest. But Sanguinius fought with something greater than power. He fought with hope. He fought with love for his father, and with loyalty to the dream of mankind. His blade flashed like lightning. His wings beat like thunder. His defiance burned like the last star in a dying sky. Yet prophecy cannot be denied. Horus was stronger. Corruption had made him vast, monstrous, an engine of destruction no mortal or even Primarch could withstand. At last, Horus struck the angel down. Sanguinius fell, his wings broken, his chest pierced. Blood, golden and bright, spilled across the floor of the vengeful spirit. But in his final act, the angel carved a wound into Horus's armor, a weakness, a crack that would later decide the fate of the galaxy. His last breath was not a curse, but a prayer for his father, for his brothers, for mankind. The moment came. The Emperor, through means both psychic and divine, stepped upon the vengeful spirit. His presence lit the corrupted ship with blinding light, and the shadows recoiled. He saw his son's body lying broken. He saw Horus standing above him, weapon in hand, eyes ablaze with dark triumph. The father looked upon his sons, one fallen in betrayal, one fallen in sacrifice, and he knew the end was here. Pause, drop the tone low, heavy. Picture the chamber. One son lies dead, his wings folded, the angel silenced forever. Another sun stands corrupted, vast and terrible, a god of war born of hatred. And before them, the Emperor steps forward, last of his kind, last hope of mankind. Father and son, God and usurer, light and shadow. The last stand begins. The chamber of the vengeful spirit fell silent. Demonic whispers stilled. The breathing walls of flesh froze. Even the warp itself seemed to hold its breath. At the center stood Horus, armored in corruption, radiating power like a black sun. At his feet, the body of Sanguinius lay, wings torn, blood cooling upon the steel floor. And there entered the Emperor. Golden light wreathed his form, a radiance that pierced even the shadows of chaos. His armor gleamed, though scarred and battered by countless campaigns. His eyes, twin stars burning with sorrow, rested upon his sons, one fallen, one corrupted, and for a fleeting moment, the galaxy seemed to wait. What did they say? Histories disagree. Some claim silence reigned, that no words passed between them, only the language of steel and power. Others whisper that Horus taunted his father, spitting venom, casting aside all love in favor of damnation. Perhaps, in some hidden chronicle, the Emperor pleaded with his son. Perhaps he offered forgiveness. Perhaps he begged Horus to turn away from ruin. But if such words were spoken, they are lost. All that remains is the clash that followed. The first strike shook the ship itself. Horus descended upon his father like a storm, his massive blade cleaving with the strength of the dark gods. The Emperor met him with the sword of his will, sparks flying, echoes thundering through the demonic corridors. Every blow was cataclysmic. Each swing tore reality, cracking the veil of the warp, spilling fire and shadow into the chamber. To the traitor legions far below on Terra, it was as though the heavens themselves were at war. Lightning ripped across the skies, earthquakes shattered the ground, storms of psychic energy consumed entire battalions. The battle of father and son was not merely fought with steel, but with the essence of creation itself. Fueled by the chaos gods, Horus was more than Primarch now. He was their chosen weapon, their avatar, their champion. His strikes carried the weight of ruin. His words dripped, his voice echoing like thunder through the chamber. You changed humanity to your dream. You denied them truth. I offer them freedom, freedom through fire, through blood, through chaos. The Emperor parried, his face lined with grief. His strikes were precise, measured, but he held back, for in his heart still lingered the love of a father for his most beloved son. And in that hesitation, Horus pressed the advantage. Blow after blow, he drove the Emperor back. His blade cut deep, his armor splintered, golden blood spilled across the floor. The master of mankind faltered. It is said that in that moment, the Emperor still hoped, still believed Horus could be saved, still held back his full might, unwilling to destroy his son utterly. But mercy has a price. Horus saw the weakness. He struck with fury and precision, rending the Emperor's flesh, shattering his defenses. With each blow, the father bled, and with each wound, the Chaos Gods laughed. At last, Horus struck him down, casting the Emperor to his knees. The master of mankind, brought low by the son he loved most. There is an old tale, whispered among the Inquisition, that a lone Imperial guard, just a mortal man, stumbled into the chamber. Perhaps by chance, perhaps guided by fate. He saw the Emperor wounded, saw Horus towering above him. With courage born of despair, Guard raised his weapon and fired. Horus turned. The shot struck his armor, harmless, laughable. Yet in that instant, Horus's wrath fell upon the man. The Warmaster unleashed his full power not upon a god, not upon a Primarch, but upon a mortal. The guard was unmade, obliterated in body and soul, his existence erased from reality. And in that moment, the Emperor saw. He saw the depth of Horus's corruption. He saw that his son was gone. He saw that nothing remained to save. The hesitation died. The sorrow burned into fury. The Emperor rose. His eyes blazed like suns. His aura erupted like a nova. He cast aside restraint, cast aside mercy, and unleashed the totality of his power. He was no longer a father. He was no longer a man. He was the Emperor, the master of mankind, and the galaxy trembled. The chamber became apocalypse. Blows fell like the collapse of stars. Psychic storms consumed the ship, ripping apart demons by the thousands. The warp itself recoiled, screaming as God clashed with God. But in the end, even the gifts of chaos could not shield Horus from the wrath of the Emperor unbound. With one final strike born of grief, of fury, of love shattered, the Emperor struck his son down. The Warmaster's body was annihilated, his soul obliterated, his essence torn apart so utterly that even the dark gods could not reclaim him. Horus, the most beloved son, the Warmaster, the betrayer, was no more. Victory came at a cost beyond measure. The Emperor, broken and burned by the release of his own might, collapsed. His form, once radiant, was ruined, his life flickering like a dying. The Imperium still bled, and the master of mankind, savior of humanity, was brought to the brink of death by his own son. But the war was ended. The traitors scattered, and Terra endured at a cost that would echo through eternity. The battle was done. The echoes of gods clashing still reverberated through the vengeful spirit, but the chamber had fallen into silence. Horus was gone, his body ash, his soul scattered into nothingness. The Emperor lay broken upon the ground. His golden armor was shattered, his flesh torn, his life force bleeding into the warp. He had triumphed, yet victory was a tomb. The ship groaned. Demons wailed in despair. With their champion destroyed, their power faltered, and the great warship withdrew, vanishing into the void. The Siege of Terra was over, but the cost had been paid in blood and fire. Upon Terra, the defenders felt the shift. The traitors began to retreat, their strength broken. The skies cleared, if only slightly, and the endless tide of corruption faltered. From the ashes of the palace, the loyal Primarchs gathered. Robaldorn, grim and steadfast, found his father upon the vengeful spirit, and with his own hands bore him back to Terra. Tears did not fall from Dorn's eyes, but the weight of his silence was heavier than any lament. Dilliman, far away, would later hear of it and despair. Vulcan and Agatai grieved as warriors who had fought too long. Russ, the wolf, hurled his fury into the night sky. The Emperor had won, but at the cost of himself. Deep beneath the palace, there stood the golden throne, a device of impossible complexity, a gateway to the webway, not corrupted, broken, and useless. It was never meant to be a coffin, yet that was what it became. The Mechanicum's finest minds, guided by Malcador the Sigillite, rushed to preserve the Emperor's ailing life. They placed his shattered body upon the throne, bound his essence into its machinery, and ignited a ritual that has never ceased. 10,000 Sekers were sacrificed to fuel the throne's power. Day after day, year after year, their souls were fed into the fire to keep the master of mankind alive. And thus, the Emperor was entombed, not dead, not alive, but chained between existence and oblivion. With Horus gone, the traitor legions fled into the Eye of Terror, hunted yet unbroken. The Great Crusade had ended, but not in triumph. It ended in ashes. The dream of unity was shattered. The Primarchs, once brothers, were sundered, some dead, some fallen, some lost to grief and duty. The Imperium became a fortress, not a beacon. Faith replaced reason. Worship replaced vision. The Emperor had sought to lead mankind into an age of enlightenment. Instead, his silence on the throne birthed a religion, the imperial cult. Billions would kneel, whispering prayers to a god he never wished to become. The galaxy had been remade into an empire of fear, devotion, and lower the music. Let the words sink like ashes. Picture Terra, scarred beyond recognition. The palace in ruins, its spires broken. Legions of the dead, loyal and traitor-elect, piled in mountains of sorrow. And at the center, upon a throne of gold, sits the Emperor silent, immobile, his eyes closed, yet his will burning still, unseen, unheard. The master of mankind is a prisoner of his own sacrifice. 10,000 years would follow. 10,000 years of war, of heresy, of faith and blood. The galaxy would remember Horus not only as the greatest traitor, but as the wound that never healed. And the Emperor's last stand, glorious and tragic, would be told as both legend and warning. Some whisper that he still thinks, still dreams, still washes. Others claim he is nothing but a corpse, kept alight by sacrifice and belief. But whether god or husk, one truth remains. The Imperium endures, because the Emperor thus ended the Siege of Terra. Thus ended the Horus Heresy. The greatest war of brother against brother left a scar that will never fade. And the Emperor, who sought to save mankind, became instead its eternal warden, chained to a throne of suffering, yet burning still with the faint light of hope. Perhaps one day he will rise again. Perhaps one day the dream will be reborn. Until then, 10,000 years of darkness stretch unbroken, lit only by the memory of his sacrifice. The fires of Terra had barely dimmed when the Imperium realized the truth. Victory had come at a price so steep it resembled defeat. The traitor legions had been repelled, Horus lay slain by the hand of his father, and the palace still stood upon the soul of Holy Terra. Yet the scars carved into the Imperium ran deeper than flesh, deeper than stone, deeper even than the fabric of time. The Great Crusade, once a hymn of triumph that resounded across the stars, had ended not with glory, but with mourning. Terra itself had become both a tomb and a monument. Entire districts of the cradle of mankind lay shattered beneath the tread of titans and the bombardments of traitor fleets. Oceans boiled where orbital fire had scarred the crust. The sky of Terra was forever choked with smoke, and its once proud cities were reduced to rubble that stretched horizon to horizon. The palace, though it endured, was no longer a seat of imperial majesty, but a fortress sealed in grief. Those who survived the siege whispered of nights filled with screams that would never fade, of halls echoing with the footsteps of warriors who would never return, But it was not Terra alone that suffered. Across the stars, word of the Warmaster's betrayal spread like poison. Entire expeditionary fleets, once the spur points of the Great Crusade, fractured. Brothers turned their blades on one another, not only at Istvan, not only at Calth, but on 1,000 forgotten battlefields where loyalists and traitors had shared bonds of blood. The once proud legions Astartes, the very sons of the Emperor, were broken. The traitors fled into the Eye of Terror, hounded, despised, yet unyielding. The loyalists, though victorious, were shadows of their former selves. No legion emerged unscarred. The Roman 13 Legion, the Ultramarines, bore the weight of rebuilding. The Roman 7, the Imperial Fists, stood forever marked by their defense of the palace. The Salamanders, the Raven Guard, the Iron Hands, each carried wounds that would never heal. And worse still, the bonds of fraternity between legions had been shattered. Never again would the Astartes march as one, shoulder to shoulder, as in the days of the Great Crusade. It is said that when Roboldorn looked upon the Golden Throne, his heart broke more profoundly than upon any battlefield. For though Horus lay slain, and the traitor fleets driven to ruin, their father, their emperor, no longer walked among them. The Imperium had won, but the one who had forged it was gone. The Emperor, their guiding light, was entombed within the throne, silent and unresponsive. The dream of a rational, enlightened empire, free from superstition and shackled faith, had died with him. In its place, something darker was born. Victory was proclaimed to the masses. Songs of triumph echoed through the devastated streets. But behind the veil of celebration, every Primarch who remained loyal knew the truth. It was not victory. It was survival that followed. The Imperium would ossify. The vision of endless progress, of ceaseless exploration, was abandoned. The age of expansion gave way to an age of mourning. The galaxy was no longer something to be conquered, but something to be held against the endless tide of enemies pressing from every direction. Bureaucracy swelled. Fear became the bedrock of governance. And where once the Emperor had spoken of reason and unity, now priests whispered of divinity and submission. The Imperium had not only lost its father, it had lost its future. Imagine the countless worlds that had once felt the pride of being drawn into the embrace of the Great Crusade. Now, they looked to Terra and saw only silence. Their Emperor did not speak. Their fleets were shattered. Their legions were broken. Many of these worlds began to fall away, some drifting toward rebellion, others toward despair. The Astronomicon still burned, its beacon lit by the Emperor's sacrifice, guiding ships through the Immaterium. But even that great light was now a cruel reminder. It was powered by his pain, his immobility, his eternal torment. Every voyage through the stars was now a pilgrimage sustained by the Emperor's suffering. The sound fades to a slow, hollow echo. Imagine the vast halls of the Imperial Palace, empty save for the hum of ancient machinery. The narrator's voice lowers, almost to a whisper. They had won, yet what was this victory? A galaxy scar, a dream broken, a father entombed in silence. For 10,000 years since that day, the Imperium has carried this wound. The war had ended, but the scar never closed. What was once a beacon of hope became a monument of fear. What was once a great crusade became a desperate defense. And yet the lie was necessary. For without the illusion of triumph, the Imperium would collapse into despair. The shattered Imperium could not afford to admit the truth, that the Emperor was gone, that the dream had ended. Thus began the long age of lies. The Siege of Terra was over, but the greatest wound of all was not visible to the mortal eye. It was not carved into stone, nor written in blood across the battlefields of the palace. It was sealed within a chamber of golden fire, where the master of mankind, the Emperor himself, sat immobile upon a throne that was both his salvation and his prison. They carried him there in silence, his body broken, his essence flickering on the edge of extinction. The golden throne, once envisioned as a device of power and transition, became instead a life support of unimaginable scale. Wires, conduits, and psychic channels stitched into his flesh, the most brilliant of the Mechanicum labored day and night, not to restore him, but to keep the flame of his existence, who had once walked among his people, commanding armies and conversing with sons, now spoke no more. His eyes closed, his lips unmoving, his voice, which had once thundered across the Imperium, was forever silenced. This silence was more terrible than death. For the loyal Primarchs, it was a void they could not endure. Roboldor knelt before a throne, begging for a word, a sign, even the faintest acknowledgement. None came. Robout Guilliman, wounded in body and spirit, departed to rebuild in old Trimer, carrying with him the weight of disillusionment. Vulcan vanished into legend, unable to reconcile his father's dream with the cruel reality. Each loyal son felt abandoned, though they knew their father still lived. It was a cruel paradox. He was present, yet gone, alive, yet unreachable. For mankind at large, the silence was unbearable. A god who does not speak is not easily worshipped, and so voices arose to fill the void. In the absence of his words, others began to speak for him. Priests, once silenced during the Great Crusade, rose from the shadows. The ecclesiarchy began to form, weaving scripture from fragments of his deeds, twisting memory into liturgy. The Emperor had never demanded worship. Indeed, he had opposed, declaring that reason, unity, and the pursuit of knowledge should be the guiding stars of humanity. The silence was fertile ground for faith. The image of the Emperor changed. He was no longer remembered as the Golden Warrior, the strategist, the visionary. He became something more, unless he became a god. The God Emperor of mankind. This transformation was not decreed by him, but by necessity. Humanity, broken and afraid, needed more than a silent figure on a throne. It needed a god to kneel to, a father who would never abandon them, even if in truth he already had. There are whispers, apocryphal stories, dangerous even to repeat, that the Emperor's mind did not fall silent, that within the endless psychic struggle of the throne, he still thinks, still sees, still suffers. If so, imagine the torment. 10,000 years of silence, unable to speak, unable to guide, forced to watch his empire twist into something he never intended. Did he scream in frustration as the ecclesiarchy crowned him a deity? Did he weep as science and reason, once his tools, were burned in the fires of dogma? Did he rage as inquisitors slaughtered in his name, claiming to uphold his will? If the Emperor still has consciousness, then his silence is not emptiness. His agony, for the Imperium, This silence became a burden both heavy and sacred. Every decision made in his name was shadowed by the knowledge that he could not correct it. Every decree was justified by the fiction that the Emperor wills it, though none could hear his will. This silence gave birth to lies. Lies became dog. Imperium learned to survive, but it forgot how to grow. It endured, but it no longer aspired. For what leader could inspire when their only words were silence? The soundscape softens. A faint hum, like the endless drone of machinery, underlies the narration. A heartbeat echoes once, twice, before fading into the static hiss of psychic fire. He sits upon his throne of gold. His eyes are closed, yet billions gaze upon him. His lips are sealed, yet billions hear his will. He is silent, and yet his silence commands all. Across the galaxy, shrines were raised. Stained glass depicted him not as he was, but as faith imagined him, radiant, untouchable, divine. The truth of the warrior, the father, the man who had led armies with his own hand, was buried beneath layers of iconography. Children grew up never knowing that the Emperor had once walked among men. Soldiers fought and died crying his name, never suspecting that their prayers would find no answer. Priests spoke in his stead, declaring truths he had never spoken, writing commandments he had never given. The man became a myth. The myth became a god, and the god was silent. The irony is cruel. The Emperor had fought to free humanity from superstition, from the chains of religion. Yet in his deathless silence, he became the very idol he had sought to destroy. Immortality came not as a blessing, but a curse. Immortality without voice, without agency, without the power to correct what went wrong. He became not only the god in chains, but the god of silence. And humanity, desperate for meaning, made his silence into a roar. 10,000 years have passed since that day. The Emperor has not spoken. He has not moved. And yet his presence still defines the galaxy. His light burns in the Astronomicon. His image adorns every chapel, every banner, every coin. His silence shapes every thought, every law, It is a silence that has endured longer than any empire in human history. A silence that has become the foundation of faith, the justification of tyranny, the excuse for unending war. But in that silence lies a question. Is he still there, watching, thinking? Or is the Imperium praying to a corpse that no longer hears them? The silence of the Emperor did not stop the Imperium from speaking. If he would not give commandments, others would. If he would not reveal the truth, then truth would be written by those hungry for power. Thus began the greatest fiction in human history, a web of lies so vast and so enduring that it became reality. In the shadow of the golden throne, new powers rose. The High Lords of Terra, cloaked in authority, declared themselves the keepers of the Emperor's will. They spoke with certainty where he had given none. The Emperor commands this. The Emperor forbids that word. The Emperor demands each decree was built on silence, and silence could not refute them. The ecclesiarchy took this further. They wrote entire books of prophecy and scripture, drawn not from his words but from their own invention. The Lectitio Divinitatis, once heresy, became sacred law. Priests thundered from pulpits, declaring that to doubt was sin, to question was treason, to think was rebellion. What began as necessity hardened into dogma. What began as survival became control. There were those who remembered, fragments of the truth carried by scholars, soldiers, and shattered legions. They remembered the emperor's disdain for gods, his rejection of worship, his dream of reason and progress, but those voices were silenced. Some were executed as heretics. Others were erased by the Inquisition. Still others vanished mysteriously, their names struck from records, their works burned. The Imperium could not afford truth, for truth was fragile. Truth would break the illusion. So the truth was buried beneath 10,000 years of lies, beneath the chanting of priests, beneath the endless drone of propaganda. And in time, even memory itself was lost. The lies bound humanity tighter than any chains of iron. Entire generations were born, lived, and died under their weight. They were told the Emperor listens to every prayer. They were told the Emperor's hand guides every victor. They were told that sacrifice was holy, that their lives were fuel for his eternal war. Billions marched willingly to their deaths, convinced they were chosen by the divine. Billions more lived in ignorance, believing their suffering was the Emperor's will. And when doubts arose, the Inquisition was there. Quietly, ruthlessly, the agents of the throne cut out corruption at its root, or so they claim. In truth, they cut away dissent, ensuring the silence remained absolute. Yet silence is never perfect. In the shadows, whispers grew. Rumors spread like wildfire among the downtrodden and forgotten. Does the Emperor truly live, or is he but a corpse sustained by machines? Was Horus destroyed, or does his spirit still linger in the warp? Was the war truly won, or are we living in an empire of denial? Such questions were forbidden, but they persisted. For though the Imperium buried truth, it could never destroy doubt. Doubt is a weed that grows even in the harshest soil. And in the warp, chaos gods laughed. To them, every whispered doubt was nourishment. Every lie that replaced truth was victory. For though Horus had fallen, the seeds of betrayal continued to bloom. Across 10,000 years, the Imperium grew vast, spanning 1,000,000 worlds. And yet, in every cathedral, every shrine, every fortress, the silence remained the same. The Emperor never spoke, he never answered, and still, they told themselves he did. When fleets triumphed, it was his blessing. When planets burned, it was his judgment. When billions starved, populations were purged, it was his justice. The silence was a mirror, reflecting whatever the Imperium wished to see. It justified everything. It excused anything. It was the silence of a god who no longer had a choice. The soundscape dims to a low choir, not of triumph but of mourning. Faint whispers, thousands of voices speaking prayers, overlap and distort into static. They say he speaks. They say he listens. But the throne is silent, and silence can be anything you want it to be. It would be easy to condemn the Imperium for its lies. Easy to say they betrayed his dream. But perhaps the truth is more cruel. The lies were necessary. Without the illusion of the God Emperor, humanity would have fractured. Without blind faith, there would have been rebellion, despair, collapse. The Imperia survived only because of the chains it forged from lies. Yet survival is not victory. Survival is stagnation. And 10,000 years of lies have left the Imperium not as the shining empire the Emperor envisioned, but as a crumbling edifice of fear. Think of the scale of that time. Entire civilizations on Earth have risen and fallen in less than 1,000 years. Empires that once seemed eternal have turned to dust in centuries. But the Imperium has endured for 10 millennia, not through truth, but through silence and lies. Every child born under its banners inherits not knowledge, but myth. Every soldier fights not for reason, but for faith. Every death is justified not by necessity, but by devotion to a God who does not speak. And still, the galaxy burns. Still, the wars continue. Still, humanity pays the price. And so the question remains, what lies at the heart of this silence? Is the Emperor truly there, watching and enduring, his mind trapped in torment? Or is he long gone, a corpse on a throne with only lies left to rule in his stead? The Imperium dares not ask. To ask is heresy, to doubt is death. But somewhere in the hidden corners of the galaxy, there are those who still whisper, what if everything we believe is a lie? The Imperium stands, vast and unyielding, yet beneath its surface lies a galaxy of whispers. For 10,000 years, lies have become truth, but truth always claws its way back, hidden in shadows, carried in rumor, spoken in quiet spaces where no priest dares to tread. On countless worlds, the common people tell stories by firelight. They do not speak of the Emperor as the priests do, not with polished sermons or rigid hymns, but with trembling voices and fearful eyes. Some say the Emperor still walks among them, hidden in the guise of a wandering stranger, testing the faith of mortals. Others claim that he died long ago, and what sits on the throne is but a bit, a husk wired to a machine. Some whisper that Horus was not destroyed, but ascended, his soul burning within the warp, waiting for the moment bidden. But they live on, passed down from parent to child, from soldier to soldier, like embers carried through the ages. And though the ecclesiarchy denounces them, though the Inquisition burns them, still the whispers spread. For in a galaxy so vast, silence cannot be perfect. The Inquisition knows this truth better than any. They know that faith is fragile. They know that silence is brittle, and so they hunt. Agents of the Inquisition move unseen through the Imperium, masked interrogators, shadowed lords, inquisitors whose word is death. Where whispers grow too loud, they arrive. Where doubt spreads like infection, they cut it out. Entire settlements vanish in the name of purity. Armies are purged, not for defeat, but for rumor. Libraries are burned, not for heresy, but for memory. The Inquisition does not serve truth. It serves silence. That, even within the Inquisition, doubts fester. Some inquisitors look upon the golden throne and wonder. They see the wasted husk, the endless drain of sackers, the silence that has lasted 10,000 years. They ask themselves, quietly, dangerously, does he truly endure? Or are we only worshipping a corpse? For such questions, inquisitors have executed their own. But execution does not kill Tao. It only buries it deeper. Even among the faithful, shadows linger. Imagine the soldier who prays each night before battle, yet hears nothing in return. Imagine the pilgrim who travels across stars to Terra, only to stand before a silent throne. Imagine the priest who has spoken sermons for decades, yet never once feels the presence of the God he serves. They tell themselves the silence is holy. They tell themselves it is divine mystery. But in the quiet moments of night, when prayers go unanswered, when death looms, they wonder, and doubt, once planted, grows like rot. Horus, too, is not silent in these whispers. Though the Imperium declares him destroyed, his name erased, his statues shattered, his story forbidden, he lingers. Some claim to have seen visions of him in the warp, not as a corpse, but as a god of rebellion, a figure cloaked in fire and shadow. They call him the first traitor and the eternal prayer, but also the forgotten son. Others believe his spirit lingers in the stars, haunting the battlefield where brothers slew brothers. That his curse still infects the blood of traitor legions. That his death was not an end, but a beginning. In taverns, in prisons, in the hidden cells of cults, the question is whispered. What if Horus did not die? What if Horus waits? And so, the Imperium rests upon a paradox. A god who never speaks, and a traitor who may never have truly fallen. The Emperor's silence is every prayer unanswered deepens it. Every battle fought without his word expands it. And the longer it lasts, the greater the hunger grows for truth, for revelation, for something beyond silence. But silence is all drones. The sound of a crowd praying fades into static until only silence remains. The narrator's voice falls to a whisper. They kneel, they pray, they sacrifice, and the throne does not answer. Perhaps it never will. And so it has been for 10,000 years. An empire built not on truth, but on silence. A people bound not by reason, but by lies. A god who does not speak, and a son whose betrayal will never be forgotten. The Imperium calls them, but victory that bleeds for 10 millennia is no triumph. It is survival, and survival, in the grim darkness of the far future, is all humanity can hope for. And so, as the story fades, one question remains, whispered across the stars, passed down through generations, a question that no priest dares to ask, no inquisitor dares to speak, but F-Soul wonders in the silence of their prayers. Who truly won? The Emperor or Horus? The galaxy offers no answer, only silence. "10,000 years have passed, and still the Emperor sits upon the throne. Still his silence reigns. Still the Imperium endures, not in glory, but in shadows. The Horus Heresy ended, but its wounds never healed. The truth lies buried beneath scripture and silence. The Emperor's dream twisted into worship, and the galaxy trapped in a night without dawn. Perhaps the greatest truth is that no truth can ever be revealed. Not about Horus, not about the Emperor, not about mankind's fate. The secret lies not in what is told, but in what is forever hidden. And so the galaxy waits. 10,000 years of war. 10,000 years of silence. And perhaps 10,000 years more. Sleep now, dream now, and let the shadows carry you into the void. The Emperor protects.